LibertyNation.com does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. On this episode of The Uprising, Liberty Nation's own national security correspondent Dave Patterson on the soon-to-be-opened World War I Veterans Memorial and the parallels with current global conditions, including the proxy war between the U.S. and Russia in Ukraine and current tensions with China. All right now on this episode of The Uprising.
We are The Uprising.
Welcome back to The Uprising, a podcast of LibertyNation.com. I'm your host, Scott Cosenza, and joining me today is LibertyNation.com national security correspondent Dave Patterson. Dave, welcome back to The Uprising. We are happy to have you back on the show. And you've been a guest on the show where we explained in detail your military history, including your missions in Vietnam, flying small aircraft for targeting and other purposes. And you also served as the Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller. So you've got it coming and going with the military. And you have, I want to encourage everybody to read your stuff in Liberty Nation. You occupy, lots of us write about different things. I write about the Supreme Court principally, but also there are other people who could definitely write about the Supreme Court on our staff. But I don't know that there are many who could definitely write about the military like you do. And I appreciate it. I just want to build up your, encourage people to go read your stuff because it's really good. I like your the voice that you bring to the discussion. So you did that with the most recent piece you published, which is about the World War I Veterans Memorial. Why don't you give us a little bit of so the World War I Veterans Memorial is going through its manufacturing and installation process, and you had a kind of special access to is it Sabin?
Yes, Sabin Howard,
the chief,
and his wife Tracy. Yes,
the chief architect of it, and tell us about what it is.
Well, it started back in 2015 when the commission that sponsors these things, as well as the National Park Service, decided that they were going to put in a memorial, replace the Pershing Park. Blackjack Pershing has a big statue there and very impressive, but they needed a real memorial for.
Now, this is not because Pershing is being canceled because of his failure to recognize pronouns or something like that, right?
No. Although he still, as I recall, uses he and she, him and her, and liberally, I might add. But they decided that a real memorial was necessary, and so they put out a competition. And the fellow who won the competition was an architect from Chicago, and he said, "Yikes! I'm an architect." But he won for his submission. But he hired a sculptor by the name of Sabin Howard, and Sabin had also submitted a entry, but didn't win. But at any rate, he ends up being the sculptor for the memorial, and his approach to it is quite magnificent. It's a wall 60 feet long, 12 feet high, with actual sculpted figures, 38 figures to be exact, and it is just quite magnificent when it's going to be installed in 2024. And so everybody can come and see it. It'll be right across on the mall, across from the Willard Hotel.
Well, before they do that, they can go to LibertyNation.com, the sponsor of today's podcast, and see the photos that Mr. Howard graciously provided us to display what's in progress. Is it fair to call it a relief? Do I have my vocabulary right?
No. Actually, a relief is just a wall that has portions of brought into relief. Mm-hmm. These are actual figures that are sculpted, each one. And during the course of the project, the program manager, Tracy Howard, Sabin's wife, allocated 700 hours per figure. And then, being a good program manager, tried to get him down to 500 hours for each figure.
Well, you can, when you look at it, you can see where the time went. It is, it's a remarkable achievement of artistic endeavor.
It really is, Scott, and it's not the only memorial. There's one very important memorial in Kansas City, but this is the one that is in Washington, D.C., where international visitors come, and it was sorely missed by people below these 107 years.
I wouldn't say this. By the way, for those that don't know, and I'm sure we all need a reminder sometimes, is the April 6th, 1917 is the day that America formally entered World War I. And that was the sort of time peg occasion for your peace. And I think it's highly relevant because of what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. And so I think it's totally relevant to today's issues. And we got to put it in the can so that we can take a little break after Easter. So all those things are motivating the discussion. But I would not say this to Mr. Howard for fear of insulting him or causing offense. But I just wondered when I want to ask you, is there any sense of that these kinds of large public projects will be dying in the future because of people opting more for virtual experiences rather than let's pack the kids in the van and drive them to DC for a long weekend in the summer?
No, I don't think so. Remember the mantra, virtual presence is actual absence. I don't think that this will in any way shape people's views of going to actually seeing the monuments. And so I think that Sabin Howard's work is safe for a very, very long time.
Virtual presence
is actual absence.
Whose line is that? Is that yours?
Actually, I stole it from a colleague who worked with me on the F-35 program.
Okay, well, I like it. I'm gonna forevermore. I will credit you rather than your unnamed.
Well, that's actually that's actually very good, and I'm grateful for that.
No charge. World War I is, when you read about the ongoing slaughter in Flanders Field of these young boys. All war is hell, but that seems to be a particularly hellish war. Am I right about that assessment?
I think you're exactly right. I mean, first of all, it was the first time that the United States and I would submit Britain, France, and the Central Powers actually came in conflict in such a mechanized way of killing. And, as it was the first time poisonous gas was used. It was the first time tanks were used.
The machine age bringing the efficiency of killing to
absolutely.
The
and unlike today, where we take steps to at least reduce the chance with armored vests and those kinds of things for the individual. No such things were there in World War I, and consequently you had carnage that was just quite unbelievable, and fighting in mud and the trench warfare, which had not been done previously, is really a step up in terms of how to kill people.
There's another aspect of World War I, and I haven't studied war enough to know if this is the first time this has happened, but it's the first major example that I know of, which is that the removal of fighting from more local concerns. What I mean by that is, if your village is under attack by the neighboring village, it doesn't take a lot of, convincing you and your neighbors to rise up an army to defend the village and maybe go after the attackers from the neighboring village, right? But if somebody invades somebody else 5,000 miles away, and you've got to now leave the farm to the, to the winds of the wild in order to attend to a war that somebody else wants you to fight. That seems to be a tougher ask. I went looking for, one of these. I thought it would be interesting to have one of these like spoken word accounts that various institutions have done. They record veterans, especially the oldest generations, so that their memories don't die off with them. Their sort of oral history. And before I ran across somebody describing the fighting, like the trench warfare, like you talked about, I found this clip about describing what they did with those who didn't want to fight. And I wanted to just play it for everybody. All right. So let us look at the following.
I've come to the now unmarked border between France and Belgium, to Beaucaire, where I'm looking for the graves of 2 British soldiers who were convicted of desertion and executed when they were only 17. Andrew Evans and Joseph Byers enlisted at 16. At 17, still underage, they were in the front line. They ran away, were court-martialed and shot. Henry Allingham on the left is 109. Harry Patch is 107. They too saw action as teenagers.
You had 2 choices. Go over the top or be shot for cowardice. And you had just about 6 seconds to make your mind up.
Back in Flanders, this is the town hall at Poperinge. The army held several executions in its courtyard. On his last night, the condemned man was brought to this cell, inside Poperinge town hall. Bare walls, a bed made of boards, and in the corner, a bucket as a lavatory. And that was it. I'm thinking especially of Private Charles Nicholson, aged 19. He deserted in 1917, 17 days after his twin brother was killed in action. Imagine that you're a soldier, the battle is over, you're resting behind the lines, and suddenly you're detailed, ordered to be part of a firing squad for duty next day in this courtyard at dawn. They line you up 6 abreast, a single shot in your rifle. You watch as the condemned man is brought out of the cell, taken to a post. A white patch is pinned to his chest. You wait for the order to fire. Death was not always instantaneous. Firing squads were known to shoot wide. Maybe they did it on purpose, or perhaps many got drunk the night before. They were too upset to shoot straight, and many were crying. So a man was only wounded, and then an officer with a revolver would deliver the coup de grace.
You think that's a valuable clip?
I think it's a valuable clip because it brings a humanity to the realities of war. There was only one soldier in World War II executed, Eddie Slovak, Private Eddie Slovak.
I didn't know that there was only one.
Right, for desertion. I believe it. And Eisenhower actually signed the warrant for his execution. It's first of all, let's face it, war is the most ugly of circumstances. You can understand how soldiers who respond to the call of duty and go over the side of the trench to face the enemy might be somewhat unhappy with those who would refuse and desert, leaving their fellows to bear the brunt of battle. So you kind of get that. But at the same time, you cannot imagine the pressure of combat. it's in many respects, it's somewhat surreal. And there has to be some accountability for people's actions. But at the same time, circumstances have to be understood. And so I think that it's a very, very difficult set of circumstances. I mean, just to say the very least. But people have to be accountable for their actions.
They're now doing this in the Ukraine, by the way. They say they're, basically going up. Excuse me. When I say doing this, let me clarify. I'm not talking about the execution like we heard about there on the clip. What I'm talking about is the shaming and publicly grabbing healthy men off the street, or what would appear to be healthy men, to try to conscript them into services. And I know that you weren't saying they're the same thing, but I just want to make the point that refusing to serve is not the same thing as abandoning a post that you're occupying while hostile forces are present. That kind of desertion, I think, is a different order than just saying, I refuse. We were talking just a minute before we started recording, and I just want to mention everybody that in World War I, they had this campaign of putting white feathers in the lapels of men who were not serving as a shaming tactic. It was invented by an admiral called Charles Fitzgerald, and it just expanded and expanded. And it got so prevalent in the UK that for the men who were like working for the government, they devised a lapel pin so they could walk around with, so they wouldn't be shamed as not participating in the war. And it said like king and country on it to kind of rebuff the idea of the shaming thing. But that's happening in Ukraine now. And, I think we're going to see more and more of it as the Ukrainians who don't want to fight increasingly, in a war that looks like it's headed for nowhere, make themselves known.
I think that, we experienced this in the Vietnam War. I mean, you had people who tore up their draft cards. You had people who went to Canada to escape the draft. But I found that I was drafted, actually. And
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes. And
you recall what your number was?
Yeah, it was obviously low.
Uh-huh. What was low?
I think it was something like 78 or something like that.
And what would be a high number?
365.
Okay, so for people who don't know, would you explain how the draft lottery worked with the?
Yes, the draft lottery was based entirely upon your birthday. And 365 days, obviously, and they chose them at random. And when your day was chosen, it was in the order in which it was chosen. So you could be April 17th, and it would be number one.
Right. I have to look up and see what my birthday was in the draft lottery to see if it was a high number or a low number.
Lucky you, we don't go and do this retroactively, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, lucky for the country too.
Yeah.
I'm not in fighting form. I don't think right now.
But you could, and I was quite, unhappy with those who. Basically, in my view, abrogated their responsibility to at least be drafted. And the other thing that I think is a dynamic that we have to at least think about is that there were people who obviously were well off and were of high station who were able to avoid being drafted, while those not as fortunate didn't have those resources and were indeed drafted and went to Vietnam. So
it is a war that was fought by America's underclass. Aren't they seem to mostly be.
Well, not entirely, but I mean there was that dimension to it, and I mean, it was one of the things you may recall that George W. was accused of inaccurately. He joined the Guard.
The draft dodging, right?
Yeah, well, but he flew F-102s.
Yeah.
And not an easy airplane to fly, I might add. And also, F-102s were among the first Air Guard to be deployed to Vietnam. You had F-102s, F-101s, and F-100s, but he could have easily been deployed flying.
Well, and I don't want to, and I am not denigrating your service as a military pilot, to be clear.
Please don't.
But being able to take advantage of education and intelligence and opportunity to become a military pilot is part of the advantage that keeps you out of, blood and guts up to your knees, right? In terms of
no, that's right. And flying and dispatching the enemy from 20,000 feet. It's somewhat clinical, very antiseptic.
Yeah.
And it again, for me, it was somewhat surreal. You'd go out in the morning and fly missions. You'd come back and have dinner at the officers' club.
And hot coffee and all the other.
Of course, the drawback was not coming back for dinner.
Yeah, I imagine. Okay, let's talk. Let's fast forward to this week, and we got a major announcement regarding NATO and Russia. Which, well, let's listen first, and then we'll comment.
The 31st flag is being raised in front of NATO headquarters in Brussels to celebrate Finland officially becoming the newest member of NATO. As a result, NATO nations now stretch 800 miles along Russia's border, double its previous length. It also means the NATO alliance has more than 60% of the world's combined military power.
This is truly an historic day because very shortly, as the Secretary General said, we will be welcoming Finland into the alliance to its seat at the table. And I'm tempted to say this is maybe the one thing we can thank Mr. Putin for, because he once again here has precipitated something he claims to want to prevent by Russia's aggression, causing many countries to believe that they have to do more to look out for their own defense and to make sure that they could deter possible Russian aggression going forward.
This military museum in Helsinki details the storied history of the Finnish military. They've really been legendary, especially throughout the 20th century, as they've fought off superior numbers, mostly Soviets, with fewer men, fewer guns, and done so very successfully. That's one of the reasons why NATO leaders want the Finns and the Swedish to join their organization, and they failed to get them to do so for many years because they had a policy of military neutrality. However, what NATO leaders failed at for years, Vladimir Putin succeeded at in days. While Finland's active military is small, it's very well equipped. Finland's artillery capacity exceeds Poland, Germany, Norway, and Sweden combined. Its forces have also been training alongside U.S. troops for years.
Well, as the situation in Europe has changed quite much over the last year, I think it gives Finland a new opportunity for better safety in the future. So we have been, for a long time, we've been relying on our independence and neutrality, and now we just realize that that's not the path of the future.
It's better than nothing, if we are alone. It's no chance in this situation.
As the world waits to see how Putin responds to this new move, part of the Kremlin's consideration could focus on Finland's reserve corps of more than 900,000 citizen soldiers standing ready to deter any further Russian aggression. Chuck Holton, CBN News, Helsinki.
Well, I think the most important comment was alluded to by Secretary of State Blinken, and that is that what, lo these many years were failed to accomplish, Putin accomplished very quickly in bringing Finland and eventually Sweden into the NATO orbit. Nothing nothing anneals the sense of danger, but danger, and I think that Putin has successfully done that. It's quite remarkable. I mean, that for as savvy as everyone claims he is, Russian President Putin, he seems to be extraordinarily tone deaf to the geopolitical world in which he lives, and has made gaffe after gaffe in terms of how he perceives the rest of the world. I mean, it's just quite astounding.
Let's give your I like to just kind of state things directly. So maybe we should have done this at the outset of the conversation, but it's good enough now. What is your current position on the war between Ukraine and Russia regarding the United States participation? Do you support our ongoing participation and like it is, or in a different mode? And I think I've said it a lot on the show, but I'll just say it again for the record. I don't support our participation in that war. I think we should do what we can to end it right away, which is to have, I think it's our war now, and they're fighting as long as we're going to pay for the bombs, basically, and the tech, and they're paying for it with their lives. But I would prefer to turn the spigots off, full stop, and make them come to some kind of an agreement and stop the war, because I fear it will turn into a world war or a global thermonuclear war. And I think the chances of that happening increase every day that it goes on. So just for the record, I just wanted to put that out there, and I wanted to ask you, what your thoughts were.
Yeah, and we look at that as it's a proxy war approach, and the United States shouldn't be involved in proxy wars. Okay, I get it, but let's look at this a different way. One of the strategies that the United States has had before Obama and Biden is that we, as a country, do not want combat on our shores. We have done remarkably well to ensure that that did not happen. All of a sudden, we have a circumstance now where what we're doing does that, but the drawback, what is terrible about what we're doing, is that nobody can tell you what the end state looks like. So my position is, yes, if we can keep the combat and if we can keep the conflict in Ukraine and have it be successful, then I'm all for it, and I support that. But on the other hand, supporting it means you have to have some understanding of what an end state looks like. The Biden administration is hopelessly devoid of a strategy and a concept of what winning looks like. Look at what they say. We're going to be there as long as it takes. Oh my gosh, that could be 15 years, 20 years. It seems like 20 years is the standard for being in places, but they have failed to do the thing that is the most important when you go into a conflict, when you purposefully go into a conflict. And Secretary Weinberger, way back in 1981, in a speech before the Washington Press Club, explained 6 reasons or conditions for going into sending U.S. forces, in that case, into war. But one of them was to have a clear objective of what winning looks like. And this administration clearly does not, and that is the shortfall. So the short answer to you is, yes, I'm for it. No, I'm against not having a strategy.
Have you thought about what that defined end goal should look like for us? What would you implement as one?
Yeah, I think that what it should look like is to have the Russians pull back out of the Donetsk region and out of Crimea. Not necessarily the April 2014 lines, because I think that Russia would be appeased if they had some sort of an assurance that their naval base, which they have had for quite some time, it would be secure. And I see a circumstance where it could be something very similar to Guantanamo in Cuba, but that they have complete access to their naval base, which is important to them, that the bridge between Crimea and Russia is secured, and
Warm water port has always been of vital strategic importance to the Russians, right?
Well, it is, and it would be for us if we were in their position.
Yeah.
What we have to convince Russia of is that as Putin's notion that the Ukraine has always been part of Mother Russia is simply not true. Historically, that is inaccurate. And so for him to continue to push that fiction, we need to find a way to convince him otherwise. And it may be that his government fails from within, and that would be fine.
Yeah, well, do we have a sense? I have not seen much in the way of reporting on this, that the internals, what do the Russian people, think of this war, and what's their level of support for it?
Well, I think in somewhat of a perverse way, you can see how effective they are by how how dissent is being put down, and so the Putin regime has been extremely vicious in putting down dissent.
I think when President Biden goes to sleep, he dreams wistfully of the ability to do that to his U.S. based critics.
Yeah, right. Well, actually, I think that I think President Biden has just a totally bizarre view of the world, that, and it's honestly it's a condition that all progressives have. They view the world the way they wished it were, not the way it is, and consequently they come up with programs and legislation and regulations that are totally at odds with the way normal people think.
Not only, I agree with you 100%. I would just say not the way normal people think, but the way that reality is likely to manifest itself. So it's
Absolutely.
like it's a poor economics thing. It's like, let's incentivize, like unintentionally incentivize behavior we want less of, not understanding that that's going to generate more of that behavior rather than less of it. It's a frustrating. You want to shake them by the lapels,
That's right, and it's one of the reasons that I use the term normal people, because normal people are persuaded in their behavior by what they see as reality, and it then reinforces normality, right?
Yeah. What's the I don't want to let you go before I just ask about China as a threat. I know that I've seen some kind of people that I find to be knowledgeable about war from their past experience that are popular YouTube channels talk about how they think that China is going to move on Taiwan in the near future. And I wanted to know what you thought about that, and what, if anything, we can or should do about it.
Well, I think that I've just got a basic philosophy. When people say they're going to go to war to take back what they want, believe them. Don't try to sugarcoat it or look at it the way you wished you were, to get back to what we were talking about. China has made threats now that they're going to stop commercial vessels in the South China Sea, Straits of Taiwan, so that they can inspect it. And Taiwan has said they will not comply. So we'll see. Recently they sent they being China, Beijing, CCP, PRC, they sent a carrier task force, close to Taiwan, between Luzon in the Philippines and the Taiwan island, And I mean, they do these things just to kind of test how we're going to react. Our reaction was that we went ahead with our meetings between Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy and President Tsai from Taiwan. And oh, by the way, something that was just was picked up by the Wall Street Journal, but not many other places. There was a bipartisan Senate group that also met with the president of Taiwan on her way through New York down to Central America. So, the good news is that, we basically called their bluff, and we're not going to let Beijing tutor us on who we can and cannot meet with. And so they react and send a carrier, the Shandong, and its support vessels to intimidate Taiwan. I think there's another aspect to this that I think that's worth talking about. Addressing your question about will they attack Taiwan and how soon. China has 2 operational carriers. One that's in that's in production and will be launched in the next year or so. They don't have an extraordinarily robust capability for air supremacy. We do. It is the one thing that keeps us on top of any kind of a conflict in that area. We also have a number of carriers, all of which have air wings and so forth. That's not to say that, oh boy, bring it on. No,
I understand. Right? Is that soon to be launched carrier a nuclear carrier from China?
No, it is not. It's okay. I don't believe it is. No, I think it's a conventionally powered. Their first carrier was a Russian knockoff. And
right. Let me ask you this: if I look around the house, I think maybe I have a bottle of Russian vodka somewhere. If I were a man of different means, I would have some Russian caviar. Sadly, there's none to be found. But I can't think of another thing in my life that I have that came from Russia or was produced by Russia. Maybe some literature. I have some Russian literature. But every room in my house is filled with things that got their start in China. Probably the microphone I'm talking to you on, not the pen in my hand, probably the shirt I'm wearing was made in China. If not, there's an odds-on chance. Is there a different way to figure that all together? Like, is China less likely to do this because of the economic hit? I mean, if we can't exchange goods with China, isn't that going to be their incentives to not engage in things that we consider to be disqualifying, hostile behavior is a much greater incentive than the Russians have. Is that true or false?
Yeah, I would say it's a greater incentive, and it also is makes the circumstances far more complex.
Right.
And it's one of the reasons that you see that the Chinese tentacles going worldwide, that their Belt and Road Initiative to circle the globe with their economic prowess is so important to them, because they want to come to a circumstance where they cow the United States economically as well as militarily.
Are we addicted to their... Like, am I addicted to $12 shirts so that I'm willing to forgive, aggression that I otherwise wouldn't, so I don't have to pay $18 to have a,
Well, of course you are. We're a market society. We're a capitalistic society. Of course you are. And so you have to resist that temptation and buy America.
On that note, we will thank you so much and pray for peace. Dave Patterson, LibertyNation.com, military affairs, national security correspondent. And we appreciate you. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Scott.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We are the Uprising.
Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe space.
You only did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.
That's it for this edition of The Uprising. Remember to hit Liberty Nation News for original articles, LN Radio, and our signature television program, The Conservative 5. Just go to libertynation.com on your browser or hit Rumble, YouTube, or check out our Liberty Nation News Roku channel. I'm Scott Cosenza. Thanks for joining The Uprising. This program is a production of libertynation.com, where truth is making a comeback.